February 22, 1944. 22:47 hours. Western Pacific, 300 miles west of Truk Lagoon. On the surface, in blacked-out seas, a 311-foot steel cylinder knifed through the waves at 20 knots. USS Tang, SS-306. Palau-class fleet submarine. Displacement, 1,525 tons on the surface, over 2,400 tons submerged. Test depth, officially 400 feet, unofficially, no one wanted to find out. She carried 24 torpedoes, a 5-inch/25 caliber deck gun, and a crew of 87 men packed into steel compartments barely wider than a city bus. At 22:47, her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane, age 33, former executive officer of USS Wahoo, stood on the small, spray-lashed bridge. Wind clawed at his Kapok life jacket. Under his feet, the tin coffin vibrated with the push of 4 Fairbanks Morse diesel engines, each driving a generator that fed the main motors. Ahead, on the dark horizon, radar picked up 3 blips. A Japanese convoy. At 22:50, the radarman in the cigarette-sized conning tower below reported the ranges. 3 contacts, bearing 030. Range 7,000 yards. 1 large, 2 smaller. 2 escorts weaving. O'Kane listened, eyes fixed on the black horizon. He knew the nickname the men had for their boat. Tin coffin. They all did. Steel plate only 7/8 of an inch thick in places. Depth charges that could crumple a hull like a soda can. A boat designed to live in an environment humans were never meant to enter. He also knew their mission, break Japan's merchant marine. At 22:52, he gave the first order. Battle stations. Surface. Make ready all tubes. Below, klaxons screamed. Men vaulted from bunks. In the forward torpedo room, 8 21-inch fish sat in the tubes, for more in the racks behind them. Mark 18 electric torpedoes, 3,200 pounds each, 21 feet long, with 575 pounds of torpex in the warhead. No telltale wake, but slower and sometimes stubborn. Mixed in the racks were Mark 14 steam torpedoes, faster at 46 knots, range up to 4,500 yards at high speed, but notorious for running too deep and sometimes failing to explode. The crew had heard the stories from earlier in the war. At 22:59, O'Kane studied his targets through the night glasses. He could just make out the lead ship silhouette, a mid-sized freighter about 3,600 tons. Fujiyama-style stern, king posts, the faint glow of shielded bridge lights. Later, records would confirm the name, Fukuyama Maru. The sea helped them. Low rain squalls drifted across the horizon, cutting visibility and confusing Japanese radar. O'Kane wanted to get in close. At periscope range, 1,000 to 1,500 yards, torpedoes had less time to wander and less room for error. 23:07. Tang had slipped inside the screen, running parallel, 1,500 yards off the convoy's port bow. The escorts, small patrol craft with weak sonar and light guns, crisscrossed nervously but never looked close enough. Left 5 degrees rudder, O'Kane ordered. Make your course 090. Steady at 15 knots. He descended the narrow ladder back into the conning tower, where the air already smelled of sweat, oil, and hot electrics. The TDC, the torpedo data computer, a 3-foot-wide analog brain of gears and cams, sat in the center. It took target bearing, range, angle on the bow, and own ship course and speed, then spat out a solution, Euro angles for each torpedo. 23:11. Range 1,500 yards, the radar and optics men confirmed. Angle on the bow, port 60, the tracking party called out. Speed, 8 knots. O'Kane checked the numbers, then nodded. Open outer doors, 1 through 4. In the forward torpedo room, hydraulics whined. Heavy bronze outer doors swung open, exposing the muzzles of 4 loaded tubes directly to the sea. Seawater seeped into the shutters. The boat's bow dipped slightly as the added open volume bit the water. Set depth, 8 feet, O'Kane ordered. Japanese freighters had shallower drafts. He wanted the warheads in the boilers, not under the keel. 2313. Tang now cut across the convoy's path. Each second tightened or loosened the firing triangle. If he waited too long, he'd lose the shot. If he fired too soon, the spread might straddle the target and waste torpedoes. O'Kane glanced at the clock. Then at the men. Stand by. Fire 1. The boat jolted as 3,000 pounds of mass left the tube, the impulse air kicked, and the torpedo spat into the Pacific. Compressed air hissed. The Euro whined as it turned the fish onto its track. Fire 2. Fire 3. Fire 4. In less than 5 seconds, Tang had committed 4 torpedoes and 1/6 of her war load to a single ship. The crew could do nothing now but wait. In the conning tower, they counted the seconds. At 1,500 yards and a speed of about 30 knots, time to impact would be roughly 90 seconds. O'Kane's voice was quiet. Down scope. Take her to periscope depth, 150 feet. Ahead flank. If the convoy survived the first salvo, it would answer with what it had: guns, depth charges, and blind fury. Better to be going down before the first explosions hit. 23:15. 70 seconds. The boat slanted down at 10 degrees. Men clutched rails and valve wheels to keep their footing. 80 seconds. 90. The first explosion slammed through the hull, a flat, metallic punch. Lights flickered. Dust and paint chips rained down. Then the second. Louder. Closer. Then the third and fourth merged into a continuous roar. For 5 seconds, Tang seemed to shudder in place, as if the ocean itself had clenched. In the sound room, where 2 operators listened on hydrophones, the report was immediate. She's breaking up. Multiple secondary explosions. She's gone, Captain. Fukuyama Maru did not sink slowly. Witnesses later described the ship disintegrating bow to stern as the torpedoes detonated near her engine rooms and fuel tanks. The freighter's spine snapped, steam lines burst, ammunition cooked off. In less than a minute, a 3,600-ton ship became twisted burning wreckage, then scattered debris. Tang leveled off at 150 feet. Ballast tanks held. No leaks worth worrying about. At 23:18, depth charges began. The escorts, now fully awake, rolled small 100 and 200-pound charges from stern racks. The canisters sank slowly, then detonated at preset depths. The first pattern was sloppy. Explosions boomed somewhere forward and high. The pressure wave slapped the hull but didn't bite. O'Kane listened to the sound bearings. Left full rudder. Make your course 270. Ahead 1/3. Let them drive past us. He knew the odds. Japanese escorts in 1944 were often poorly trained in anti-submarine warfare. Their sonar sets were primitive. Many still believed that a submarine could not dive deeper than 300 feet. Tang could go deeper than that. Much deeper, as they would prove. But not yet. Now, still within torpedo range of the dying convoy, O'Kane considered his next move. At 23:24, the immediate danger passed. The escorts pounded empty water while Tang slid away in deeper shadow, 3,000 yards out, keel at 180 feet. He raised the periscope. Up scope. Green water slid away from the lens. He wiped it quickly and scanned. Flames licked the horizon where Fukuyama Maru had been. The sky reflected orange off low clouds. Men and wreckage covered the sea in a widening ring. The escorts circled angrily, searchlights stabbing into the night, but their beams never crossed the small, dark periscope head. O'Kane didn't linger. He took one more sweep, then pushed the handles forward. Down scope. Rig for silent running. We'll be back at dawn. The tin coffin turned away, electric motors humming quietly, batteries feeding current to twin screws at 5 knots. Inside, men relaxed a fraction. Torpedo men reloaded empty tubes, muscles straining as they rolled 3,000-pound cylinders down cramped passageways on greased skids. In less than 12 hours, this boat, mocked for what she might become if depth charges found her, would slip into another convoy and put 4 more torpedoes into a 6,800-ton ship in full daylight. The first night of Tang's first war patrol was not over. The legend of the tin coffin was just beginning. February 23, 1944. 5:12 hours. Same patch of ocean, Western Pacific. The night's first kill still burned on the horizon. Flames from Fukuyama Maru's wreckage stained the low clouds, a smear of orange on a dark gray sky. Tang cruised at periscope depth, 60 feet, making 4 knots on battery power. In the control room, red lights glowed over engine telegraphs and depth gauges. The boat smelled of coffee, diesel residue, and men who hadn't seen fresh air in hours. At 5:14, the sound operator stiffened. Multiple screws. Medium speed. Bearing 340. Fading then increasing. Zigzagging. Another convoy. O'Kane stepped to the periscope well. Up scope. He broke the surface, water cascading from the lens. The waves were small, wind low. Visibility decent. Through the scope, he saw what he wanted to see, a line of ships, pale smudges against the brightening eastern sky. 1 large transport, 2 smaller freighters, an escort forward on the port bow. Later, Japanese records would name the big one, Yamashimo Maru, 6,800 tons. Range, 8,000 yards and closing. 5:21. Tang slid forward, keeping the escort's bow pointed away. The boat's sonar tracked the nearest warship's propellers, a higher-pitched, faster beat than the heavy churn of merchant screws. The escort sat in front of the convoy like a guard dog, weaving a search pattern. O'Kane watched its turns, breathing steadily, counting seconds between course changes. "Come right to 010. All ahead 1/3, he ordered. The plan was simple and dangerous. Let the escort open a gap in its coverage, then push Tang through that gap on the surface at flank speed, get inside the screen, and hammer the fat merchantman from close range. At 5:29, the escort committed to a wide turn to starboard, swinging away to investigate a phantom contact. That was the moment. "Surface. Ahead flank," O'Kane ordered. The ballast vents closed. High-pressure air blew water from the main ballast tanks. Tang rose like a steel whale, bow lifting. At 5:31, her slender conning tower broke the surface. Men popped the bridge hatch, scrambled up the ladder, and fanned out to their stations. The sky in the east was now slate gray, the moon fading. Tang accelerated. On the surface, her 4 diesel engines drove the main motors as generators, pushing the boat to 20 knots, more than double her submerged speed. Below, the TDC team worked the solution. Range 4,000 yards. Target speed 7 knots. AOB port 80. Set up for 4 bow shots, O'Kane said. Same as last night. Depth 8 feet. The escort's silhouette shrank behind them. It had no idea an American fleet submarine, 311 feet long, was sprinting through its own screen. By 5:37, Tang had crossed the convoy's track and angled in. Distance to Yamashimo Maru, 2,000 yards. The big freighter's profile loomed larger in the rangefinder. Forward mast, bridge, stack, aft mast, kingposts. Crates stacked on deck. Likely troops and supplies for Japan's shrinking perimeter. O'Kane dropped into the conning tower as cold spray lashed the bridge. Stand by. Open outer doors, 1 through 4. Doors open, Captain. He watched the TDC dials. Tiny brass pointers swung smoothly. Range 1,500. Speed constant. Angle on the bow, port 60. He didn't need more. Fire 1. Fire 2. Fire 3. Fire 4. Torpedo impulses shuddered through the bow in rapid sequence. The gyro angles were tight, the spread narrow. This was a surgeon's shot, not a shotgun blast. He ordered a shallow dive. Take her down. Periscope depth. Ahead 2/3. The hull slid under again, leaving only a froth of displaced water. At 5:39, 45 seconds into the run, the first torpedo hit. The impact was farther forward than he'd ideally planned, near the stern. The explosion buckled the aft hull of Yamashimo Maru. The second hit seconds later, just aft of the stack. Boilers ruptured. Superheated steam burst out, scalding men on deck. Then the third. The third struck just forward of the bridge, in or near the forward holds. The warhead's 575-pound Torpex charge detonated adjacent to fuel or ammunition. The result was not a simple hull breach. Men in Tang's soundroom heard it as a vast secondary, a much larger, sustained detonation that rolled through their hydrophones. O'Kane snapped the periscope up. He saw a ship no longer behaving like a ship. Yamashimo Maru twisted along her length, the midship section visibly bending. The hull heaved out of the water, bow and stern rising in opposite directions, as if invisible hands were trying to snap her in half. Flames erupted from open hatches and ventilators. In that instant, the freighter's fate was sealed. She began to sag, then slide under, stern first. The escorts reacted. 2 small warships charged in, guns firing wildly at the periscope feather. Shell splashes walked towards Tang's last known position. O'Kane didn't wait to admire his work. Down scope. Take her to 250 feet. Rig for silent. All ahead 1/3. This time, the Japanese were angry and closer. Depth charges started within minutes. At 5:46, the first close pattern went off. 4 explosions, spaced 2 seconds apart, marched across the hull. Tang bucked, gauges rattled, a valve in the forward trimline leaked a thin spray. But she held. O'Kane took her deeper. 300 feet. Keep her level. The gauge crept down past the official test depth. 280. 290. 300. Steel creaked. Bulkheads groaned under the load of nearly 130 pounds per square inch of sea pressure. Somewhere above, a Japanese sailor on a small escort ship was dropping 200-pound steel canisters into the wake, hoping blind guesses would crush the tin coffin below. They did not. By 7:10, the charges had stopped. The escorts, low on ordnance and uncertain of the target, widened their search. Tang crawled away at 2 knots, hugging 300 feet, batteries draining. She had been at war for barely a month. In a single night and morning, 22 to February 23, 1944, she had torn 2 Japanese transports out of the Pacific with 8 torpedoes. Jiatan Maru on the 17th. Fukuyama Maru. Yamashimo Maru. And she was not done. February 24, 1944. 9:17 hours. Another convoy. This time, a tanker, a freighter, and a destroyer. Rain squalls danced across the surface, masking movements and radar returns. Tang stalked the group for hours, losing contact, regaining it. O'Kane waited for night, but the weather gave him an opening instead. At 1942, after sunset, he made his move. On the surface again, he closed to within 2,000 yards and fired 4 torpedoes at the freighter, a Tachutaki Maru-class vessel about 3,000 tons. 3 of them hit. In minutes, the ship heeled over and went down. The destroyer and tanker raked the sea with gunfire, convinced they saw a shadow where there was none. Tang submerged, looping wide. She kept the tanker on sonar all night. At 6:03 on February 24th, in the half-light of dawn, Tang crept within 500 yards, barely enough room for the torpedo's arming pistols to engage. The tanker Ekison Maru steamed along, oblivious. Extra lookouts crowded her decks, scanning for periscope wakes. They never saw the shots. Fire 3. Fire 4. 2 torpedoes hammered into the tanker's flank in quick succession. Men on deck were hurled into the air along with cargo, lifeboats, and debris. Ekison Maru rolled and sank in 4 minutes. Tang went deep as the escort's depth charges rained into the sea. During this evasion, a leak opened in the forward torpedo room. Water sprayed. Tang's bow grew heavy. Depth increased past what the gauges could show, beyond 612 feet, where the needle bottomed out. For a moment, the tin coffin truly became one. Steel under nearly 275 pounds per square inch. Men tightened valves, shifted ballast, blew tanks in controlled bursts. Inch by inch, the boat answered. Tang climbed back to survivable depths. The crew, soaked and exhausted, knew exactly what had almost happened. By the time she limped into Midway at the end of February, Tang's first war patrol had spent all 24 torpedoes and put at least 5 confirmed Japanese ships on the bottom, 3 of them in a furious 48-hour window. In an ocean where skeptics had called subs tin coffins and questioned their value, Tang had just delivered a blunt answer. The boat had survived its first real test. The men had too. Ahead lay more patrols, harsher seas, and tighter odds. And, eventually, a single night in the Formosa Strait when this same tin coffin would smash 4 freighters and a destroyer in a few violent minutes, before its own final torpedo turned back. By mid-1944, Tang was no longer an unproven boat with a morbid nickname. On her third war patrol, starting June 8, 1944, she prowled the East China Sea and Yellow Sea, hitting convoys under the noses of 16 escorts, sinking at least 10 ships totaling over 39,000 tons according to post-war assessments. On one day alone, June 24th, she fired spreads into overlapping targets and destroyed more ships than her crew initially realized. Tang's reputation spread quietly through the U.S. submarine force. O'Kane's aggressiveness, surfacing at night, getting inside screens, firing from close range, and then diving deep, fit the new doctrine that had emerged as radar, better torpedoes, and hard-won experience shifted the balance under the Pacific. But risk scaled with success. October 1944. The war in the Pacific had reached a new phase. The U.S. Navy was driving toward the Philippines. Japan's shipping, already strangled, depended heavily on convoys through the Formosa Strait, narrow waters mined and patrolled, the kind of place where a submarine hunter might become the hunted. September 24, 1944. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on her 5th war patrol. By September 27th, she had topped off fuel at Midway and headed alone towards Formosa, choosing to slip through the dangerous strait by herself rather than as part of a coordinated wolf pack. Her loadout, another 24 torpedoes, including several Mark 18 electrics that had replaced earlier problem-plagued models. Her crew, battle-tested men who had already seen ships disintegrate through the periscope. 10 to 11 October, she sank Joshu-Go and Oita-Maru, cargo ships loaded with supplies. The patrol was already successful. But the night that would cement her legend came later that month, off the coast of China, near an island the Allies called Turnabout. October 23, 1944. 21:30 hours. Approaches to Formosa Strait. Tang's SJ surface search radar was nearly overwhelmed. The screen was crowded with blips, so many that the scope looked like noise. The radar operator strained to separate individual echoes. Multiple contacts. Captain. Big formation. Looks like at least 5 or 6 ships, plus escorts. Bearing 110, range 18,000 yards. O'Kane came up to the bridge. The sky was moonless. Along the horizon, faint silhouettes emerged, tanker-like hulls, transports, and freighters, each around 6,000 to 7,000 tons. Some carried planes on deck, others crated aircraft lashed to the bow and stern. This was a high-value convoy, fuel and aircraft, the lifeblood of Japan's shrinking reach. He made his decision quickly. Battle stations. Surface. We're going through them. At 21:42, Tang accelerated to flank speed on the surface. 20 knots in black water, closing on a convoy that lumbered along at 8 to 10 knots. The escorts, a destroyer and several smaller ships, zigzagged in loose patterns, searchlights off, trusting darkness more than instruments. The tactical plan O'Kane favored was simple: penetrate the convoy line, fire bow fish at the leading ships, then swing and launch stern torpedoes into targets astern. No long-range shooting. No cautious angles. Get in close, hit hard, get out. At 22:03, range dropped below 5,000 yards. In the conning tower, the tracking party fed continuous bearings and ranges into the TDC. The big analog machine clicked and hummed, generating firing solutions in real time. Target 1, large freighter, 7,000 tons, bearing 100, range 2,500, speed 9 knots. Target 2, tanker, 6,600 tons, bearing 120, range 2,700. Target 3, transport, similar displacement, bearing 90, closer. O'Kane selected a 3-target bow spread. Set up 2 fish for each of the first 3 targets. Depth 10 feet. Open outer doors 1 through 6. Out on deck, invisible in the blackness, the forward tubes opened one by one, exposing 6 torpedoes to the sea. 22:07. Tang sliced between 2 columns of merchantmen, like a wolf running down the aisle of a panicked herd. She passed within 1,000 yards of a freighter's beam. Japanese sailors on watch might have seen a darker shadow against the darkness, a brief silhouette of a conning tower, but by then it would be too late. Range 1,000 yards, steady, the plot reported. Fire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 torpedoes left the bow, fan spread to cover 3 hulks. The first detonations came less than a minute later. 2 torpedoes exploded under the stack and engine room of the nearest ship, likely Kogen Maru. Another tore into the stern of the middle freighter, Matsumoto Maru. 2 more slammed the farthest ship under her stack and engine spaces. Within seconds, all 3 were belching fire and losing way. Even as the echoes rolled, Tang's helmsman swung her hard over. Left full rudder. Bring our stern to bear on that tanker crossing astern. Behind them, chaos erupted. Escorts shouted over radios, searchlights snapped on, tracers arced blindly into the night. Ships tried to turn away from the carnage, but the tight formation left little room. A large tanker cut across Tang's wake, trying to ram the submarine. O'Kane watched from the bridge. Hold steady, now, right full rudder. Cross his bow. Tang knifed across the tanker's path, barely clearing its bow. The tanker, committed to the turn, couldn't avoid the transport behind it. Steel met steel. The tanker's bow plowed into the transport's starboard quarter. Plates buckled. Steam lines ruptured. Men were thrown from decks. Inside 400 yards now, Tang's stern tubes bore on the tangled silhouettes. Ready aft. Open outer doors 7 through 10. 4 stern shots. Depth 8 feet. Fire 7, 8, 9, 10. 4 torpedoes left the stern tubes at near point-blank range. 1 ran true into the tanker's already damaged bow. Another hit the transport amidships. Under the combined stress of collision and 2 torpedo hits, the wounded ships simply failed. The tanker began to sink bow first. The transport pitched to a 30-degree up angle, her stern rising. Machinery, loose cargo, and men tumbled down her tilting decks. Behind the convoy, a Japanese destroyer had been turning in to attack Tang. At the instant it crossed the converging paths of wounded ships and incoming torpedoes, one of the electric Mark 18s detonated close aboard. Whether it struck the destroyer directly or exploded in the mess of collision and friendly gunfire, witnesses on Tang saw the warship suddenly erupt. A column of fire shot from the destroyer's midships, where boilers and magazines were clustered. The ship folded, broke, and disappeared in a shower of sparks and splinters. One moment, it was a deadly hunter. The next, it was gone, part of the wreckage. In less than 20 minutes, Tang had gutted a convoy. 4 freighters were sinking or dead in the water. A destroyer had vanished in a single violent flash. The remaining ships sprayed the sea with shells, firing at radar ghosts and wakes. 23:01. Reload parties in both torpedo rooms sweated over hot steel, manhandling reloads into tubes as fast as they could. On Tang, this was muscle work, chain falls, skids, brute force. O'Kane did not linger in the center of the formation. Ammunition and anger remained. Dive. Take her to 240 feet. Rig for silent. Stand by for depth charges. Tang slid under as shells whipped over the water above. The escorts, now truly enraged, began sowing depth charges. Patterns rained into the sea. Some detonated dangerously near. The hull flexed under the shocks. Pipe hangers snapped. A few gauges cracked. But the hull did not. 042, October 24th. Sound reported the convoy limping away. Only one large transport remained afloat, stopped dead in the water. The others were gone or sinking. O'Kane made his decision. We're going back to finish the cripple. Tang rose to periscope depth and crept towards the stationary target. The sea was calmer now, the night older, but the danger remained. Escorts still circled, dumping occasional charges on suspected contacts. At 2:14, Tang reached firing position, 900 yards from the last big ship. This would be the 23rd torpedo of the patrol. Torpedo ready, the forward room reported. O'Kane checked the TDC, hot, straight, normal. Fire 1. The torpedo streaked out, clear and true. Through the scope, he watched its plume and then the impact. The explosion ripped into the still-floating hulk. The transport shuddered, broke its back, and began to sink. Tang's score for the night, 4 freighters and a destroyer, staggered and smashed in barely a couple of hours. Even after wartime and post-war revisions, that single engagement remained one of the most devastating attacks by a U.S. submarine in the Pacific War. But the night was not done. Tang still had 1 torpedo left in the forward room. Number 24. And before dawn on October 25, 1944, that last fish, the final shot of the tin coffin, would turn on its own ship and begin the most desperate chapter of Tang's story. October 25, 1944. 2:30 hours. Near Turnabout Island, off the China coast. Tang ran at periscope depth, batteries low, crew exhausted but elated. The men knew what they'd just done. They had hammered a heavily escorted convoy, sunk multiple freighters, destroyed a destroyer, and walked away. In the forward torpedo room, only one weapon remained. A single Mark 18 electric torpedo sat in the tube, 24th of the patrol. The torpedo men had checked it twice. Gyro, motor, heater, exploder. Everything looked normal. In the conning tower, O'Kane weighed his options. They held a crippled enemy transport in their sights earlier. Now, intelligence and instinct both told him that more traffic would move through these lanes before dawn. But the immediate tactical picture was dominated by one last target, a damaged transport still afloat in the area. At 2:30, he made the call. We'll finish her. Tang eased closer, maintaining periscope depth. Range to the cripple, about 1,800 yards, closing. No escorts nearby on sonar. Surface calm. Conditions, on paper, ideal. O'Kane ordered a final firing solution. Set up that last fish. Bow shot. Depth 10 feet. The TDC crew plugged in the numbers. Bearings and range came in steady. Angle on the bow. Port 60. Target speed. Barely making 2 knots. Drifting, not running. Normal doctrine would allow a torpedo shot at this range. The Mark 18, with a speed around 29 knots, should take about 2 minutes to reach the target. O'Kane waited for the right angle. Range 900 yards. He nodded. Fire 1. The last torpedo left the bow with a familiar shove. For the 24th time on this patrol, the tin coffin had sent steel and explosives into the dark. Seconds later, things went wrong. In the conning tower, the sound operator stiffened. Captain, that fish is making a strange noise. The Mark 18's electric motor whirred differently than steam torpedoes. But this sound was off, an uneven, laboring warble. O'Kane listened. Years of experience, from Wahoo and Tang both, told him what might be happening, a gyro failure. A torpedo that would not hold its course. Report bearing, he snapped. Bearings changing. She's turning left, sir. A circular run. On paper, the odds were low. In practice, every submariner knew the stories. A torpedo that veered into a loop, curved 180 degrees, then kept coming. A homing missile of metal and explosive, ignorant of friend or foe. If it completed its circle, it would run back towards the point where Tang had fired. Towards Tang. Emergency! All ahead full. Hard right rudder. O'Kane shouted. Get us out of the track. Tang lunged forward. The helmsman twisted the wheel. The boat heeled as much as a submarine could, turning to starboard. In the forward torpedo room, men heard the sudden change in engine pitch, felt the shift of the deck under their boots. Time was measured in seconds now. At 29 knots, the torpedo covered 50 yards every 3 seconds. A 900-yard run and circular turn left very little margin. In the sound room, the bearing swept. She's coming back. Bearing 180. 170. 160. Impact came about 20 seconds after firing. The torpedo struck Tang on the starboard side, abreast the after torpedo room. The explosion was catastrophic. The aft compartments flooded almost instantly. The blast ripped through bulkheads, hurled men across compartments, shattered ribs and limbs even as far forward as the control room. Lights went out. Emergency lamps flickered to life in a red, smoky glow. The boat pitched violently nose up, stern dropping. Tang plummeted by the stern. In seconds, the after torpedo room, after engine room, and aft battery compartments were gone, crushed, flooded, or both. Men still alive in forward spaces felt the whole hull groan as it dropped. On the bridge, 9 men, including O'Kane, were thrown into the dark sea as the conning tower was engulfed. Below, the submarine hit bottom at about 180 feet, shallow by ocean standards, but deep enough to kill everyone aboard if they could not escape. Roughly 30 survivors made it into the forward compartments. They crowded into the forward torpedo room, cramped, flooded in places, lit by emergency lamps. Smoke from an electrical fire in the forward battery added to the choking air. They knew the numbers. Designed crew, 87. Survivors in forward space, maybe a third of that. O'Kane was not among them. He was now on the surface, one of a handful of men in the water, clinging to debris in a sea littered with victims of their own success. Japanese survivors from a ship's Tang had sunk. Some of those survivors, burned and battered, would soon be pulling American sailors from the water with rage in their eyes. In the forward torpedo room, the men prepared to do something no U.S. submarine crew had ever done under combat conditions: a mass escape using Momsen lungs. The Momsen lung was a simple rebreather, a green pouch worn on the chest, with a soda-lime canister to scrub carbon dioxide and a mouthpiece to recycle exhaled air. It allowed a submariner to ascend slowly from depth without embolism. Practiced in training tanks, it had never been used like this, 180 feet down, in combat, with a damaged boat and an enemy overhead. Publications, code books, and logs were burned. Anything sensitive went into the furnace or deep into bilges. Men double-checked the escape trunk, a narrow vertical chamber leading to the hull's top hatch. They could hear muffled explosions as Japanese escort ships dropped depth charges nearby, perhaps finishing off what they thought was a damaged American sub or another contact. Each concussion rattled the hull, threatening to blow out seals or jam hatches. Time bled away. When the charges paused, the first group entered the escape trunk. Water filled the chamber. Pressure equalized. The outer hatch was opened. One by one, they floated out, inflating their Momsen lungs, and began the long, slow ascent through 180 feet of seawater. Not all made it. On the surface, O'Kane and a few others had been treading water for hours. Dawn eventually crept up. A Japanese escort picked up survivors, both American and Japanese. The captured Tang sailors were beaten by some of the men who, hours earlier, had been pulled from sinking freighters torpedoed by Tang. O'Kane later recalled that realization, understanding that their captors were survivors of their handiwork, as a strange shift in perspective. The war had turned from numbers and tonnage sunk back into flesh and blood. 9 Americans ultimately survived Tang's loss. They were taken to Ofuna, a notorious interrogation camp, where they spent the rest of the war under harsh conditions. Back in the Pacific, Tang was simply gone. Stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on February 8, 1945, she remained on Eternal Patrol, the traditional status for submarines lost at sea. Wikipedia Evolution and Legacy after the war, Navy analysts and the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee pored over Japanese records. Initial wartime credit lists had already recognized Tang as one of the most successful submarines in the U.S. fleet. Post-war corrections eventually settled on 33 ships sunk, totaling around 116,454 tons, first among all American submarines in both tonnage and number of ships. Her third patrol alone, with 10 ships sunk for about 39,000 tons, remains unmatched. Richard O'Kane returned home after years as a prisoner of war. The war had carved deep lines into his face and left permanent marks on his body, but his tactical mind remained sharp. He stayed in the Navy, rose in rank, and became one of the service's most respected submarine officers and instructors. For his leadership during Tang's last patrol, he received the Medal of Honor, recognition not only of personal courage, but of the aggressive doctrine he embodied. In classrooms and wardrooms, O'Kane dissected Tang's patrols in detail. Young officers listened to a man who had taken a tin coffin into some of the most heavily defended waters in the Pacific and come back, until that final torpedo. He didn't glorify the danger, he explained it. Night surface attacks, close-range shots, the realities of torpedo failures and circular runs, the necessity of initiative and calculated risk. His book Clear the Bridge laid out Tang's war patrols in blunt, technical prose, helping shape how future generations understood submarine warfare, less as Hollywood drama and more as a series of precise, cold calculations made under incredible pressure. Technically, Tang's loss reinforced several hard lessons. Circular run torpedoes, once rare anecdotes, became serious engineering concerns. Torpedo safety mechanisms were improved, procedures for firing in constrained waters were updated. The submarine community paid closer attention to minimum safe gyro angles and longer initial run distances. Tactically, Tang's patrols validated a more aggressive approach to commerce raiding, attacking on the surface at night using radar, penetrating convoy screens, and firing from close range rather than timidly sniping from miles out. That doctrine, refined by men like O'Kane and his former skipper Mush Morton of Wahoo, would echo into the Cold War and beyond. Culturally, Tang became a symbol. At the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, the Final Mission, USS Tang Submarine Experience, allows visitors to stand in a mock-up of Tang's control room, assigned to individual crew stations as the events of 24 to 25 October 1944 play out. They hear the orders, feel the simulated concussions, and experience the abrupt transition from hunter to hunted as the last torpedo circles back. Photographs of Tang's crew line the walls, young men in dungarees and caps, many of whom never came home. For each visitor, the exhibit ends with a simple question: did the man whose station you held survive? The answer, for most, is no. And yet, the boat they served on, mocked as a tin coffin by some who doubted the survivability of submarines and the wisdom of sending them into shallow, heavily defended waters, proved something else entirely in the months it lived. It proved that a 311-foot steel cylinder, crewed by fewer than 100 men, could strangle an island empire's lifelines thousands of miles from home. That disciplined aggression, combined with technical skill and cold nerve, could turn fragile machinery into a decisive weapon. From 22 to 24 February 1944, when she shredded a series of convoys near Truk, to the night of nights, in October when she tore 4 freighters and a destroyer out of a single convoy line, USS Tang earned her place in history. She did it not with mystique, but with hard numbers, torpedoes fired, ships sunk, tonnage denied to an enemy. She did it at ranges measured in hundreds of yards, minutes from death if depth charges hit just a little closer. In the end, it was one of her own torpedoes that killed her. That last fact, the 24th Fish's circular run, adds a bitter, almost ironic edge to her story. But it does not erase what came before. If anything, it underscores the sober truth of submarine warfare. Every patrol was a roll of the dice, every dive a wager of 87 lives on steel, engineering, and human judgment. Today, when modern submarines, nuclear-powered, armed with missiles that can strike continents from hundreds of miles away, slip silently through oceans, their crews inherit tactics and traditions written in boats like Tang. They practice emergency ascents. They drill on weapons safety. They learn to think aggressively but precisely. Some of their instructors still reference one particular boat and its captain when explaining how to close with a convoy, how to fire under pressure, and what it means to keep your head when seconds decide the fate of a ship. They may not always say it aloud, but the lesson is clear. They mocked the tin Coffin submarine, until one of them, USS Tang, sank 4 freighters and a destroyer in one night, and kept fighting until the very last torpedo came back.